to see you. If you don't mind jotting down your address, we just want to send a thank you letter for coming here today. And having said that, I'm going to dismiss the kids going to junior church. Mary Dale, thanks for playing for us today. And Gary, thanks for leading us. I really appreciate that. Make sure I got my suit buttoned. I don't know, I think I've grown here a little bit. It must have been all the weightlifting I've done at the Y. Or lifting something else at the table. You know what? If someone went around following you around and had to make a report on you, what would that report say the kind of person you are? Or someone just made a journey into this church just to make a report on this church and the church people. What would they say? What kind of people would they say we are? Would they say we're kind of a people that's kind of mean-spirited, or you're a person that's kind of mean-spirited, kind of selfish and prideful? Or would they say, now there is a person, there are some folks who are full of love? I'll tell you this little story. It's about a guy, I guess you could say he was kind of full of love, but he had the wrong outcome. It happened up in Montreal, Canada. A man by the name of René Jobin. And he fell in love with this girl. The bad thing is the girl's parents didn't want him around her for some reason. And he thought, I've got to do something to be able to get some time with this girl. And he was wandering around outside the apartment building where she lived, and he noticed that there was a fire alarm strategically placed on the outside of that building. So he had this idea. I'm not saying it was a great idea, but he had this idea. He says, what I'm going to pull that fire alarm. When the fire department comes, everyone's going to scatter out of their building, and they'll be occupied by the possible fire that there really isn't, and I'll sneak off a few minutes with my girl. He did that the first time, and sure enough, in came the fire department. Her mom and dad went with the fire department, went around the building to try to look to where this fire was, which really wasn't, and he got to spend a few moments with her. That's a great idea. He tried it a second time. The same thing happened. Did it 7 more times. Now at this point, the Montreal Fire Department was trying to think we see a pattern here. Therefore, they set a watch, and René was caught. The conclusion of the story is this. The lovelorn girl is hoping that by the time he got out, he wouldn't be too old to marry her. Now, that's not the kind of love we need to be known for. We should be known, brothers and sisters of Jesus Christ. We should be known for the love that influences other people for Jesus Christ. We must have the kind of love that has a willingness and a sacrifice for other people. Our love for others is to be the strongest argument of our faith in Him. We must be known by our Christ-like love for others. Since the beginning of the year, I've been sharing with you some of the one another passages in the Bible to become what we call one another church. That's given dozens and dozens of times in the New Testament. And today I want to look at the granddaddy of them all. It's the one that's repeated more than all the other one another's, and that's to love one another. It's given in 4 different Bible books by 3 different authors. It's given 9 different times, and it sets up what the other one another's are to be all about. Where it says to be devoted to one another in brotherly love, to honor one another above yourself, to live in harmony with one another, be sympathetic, love as brothers, to serve one another in love, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another. Let us consider how we can spur one another toward love and good works. Folks, you can't be a one another church without love. In fact, love one another is the one command that Jesus gives us of all the one another's. In fact, here's what he says over in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35. He says, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. And here's verse 35. By this, all men will know that you're my disciples. And what does it say? if you love one another. Well, it says at least 3 things about loving one another. Thing number 1, love is expected. It's expected. Did you get it? Verse 34, Jesus said, "A new command I give you." You see, love is not optional for believers. It's commanded of us. Jesus expects it. In fact, in the context of which I just shared from you, Jesus is talking to his disciples. Guys who believe in him, just like you and me. That he says, here's what you must do, church at Austin, church of wherever you put it. You must love one another. It doesn't mean we can't love people outside the church, but it means it should at least start on the inside. He says we should also love as he loved us. Our love for each other should be the same as the love for Jesus Christ that he has for the church. It's got to be complete. It's got to be sacrificial. To put it in the placement of things, and this is what really startles me, think when Jesus said those words. You want to know what was happening? The Last Supper. In fact, right before he said those words, he showed what these words meant. He got down with a wash basin, with towel, and he was washing these guys' feet. Wow. I know some churches do that, but when I think of that, I think, yuck. But he was doing that. 12 to 15 hours later after he said these words, he was giving his life on the cross. See, Jesus did not just say the words, but he backed up his words by his actions. I ask the question, what does it mean to love one another? Well, let me put it in perspective. I want you to think of a particular thing you love to do, or a particular, let's say, restaurant in which you like to go. Now, some of you like fishing, right? That would be an understatement. Some of you people are fishing fools. Would that be right? Correct. Some of you love cross-stitching. I'm not one of you, but some of you do that. Some of you like to scrapbook. Some of you like gold. Some of you like pizza. You name it. Or think about a recent restaurant you really enjoy. I meant the food is delicious, service is great, the price is affordable. If someone asks you what your favorite restaurant is, if I were to ask you what's your favorite restaurant, you would have the answer. Am I right? You'd be right. I mean, you really love eating at that place. Compare that kind of love with the love you're supposed to have for your family. If I asked you all, you would trade places with your children in a heartbeat if they were suffering through a serious malady or if they were losing their life. You would trade your place with them in a heartbeat. So what do we say when we say, I love one another? I love my church. What does it mean when I say Jesus commanded us to love one another? Does he want us to love them like we love our favorite activity or love our favorite restaurant? Or does he want us to love one another like we love our families? I hear that there's an internet service, and I'm not so tech savvy as some of you all are, or a few of you are. But I'm told that there's an internet service called Yelp. And I'm told that on Yelp, you could go onto it and you can rate your restaurant or any restaurant to which you've gone. I mean, if the service was great, the food was great, you could recommend them on Yelp. If it was not good, you could also warn people on Yelp that maybe they don't want to go to that place. Now, with our families, it's not about service. It's about relationships. We love our families for who they are, not necessarily what they have done. Our love for them is unconditional and sacrificial. There are good times in our families and there are bad times, correct? But we don't rate them on Yelp. You just love them. Understand the church was never meant to be like a restaurant. It is a family. Our love for one another is based on relationships. Our first and primary part of the relationship begins with Jesus Christ. Because of our relationship with Jesus Christ, we have a relationship with one another. In fact, we just celebrated our relationship as a family around this dinner table of communion. And being brought into that relationship, we aren't only brought into a relationship with Him, but we're brought into a relationship with one another. If you have a relationship with Jesus Christ, you are part of His body, the church, His bride, the family of faith. Years ago in Newsweek, when they used to print, do they still print Newsweek, or you have to go online to get it? But a few years back, Newsweek had the copy of, and it said this: forget the church, follow Jesus. And I know there's a lot of people out there that think that way, but when you check it out, if you were to take the Bible, fed it into a computer, it does not compute. It's not an option. You see, it's a package deal. When you're baptized into Jesus Christ, you're baptized into His family. You're baptized into the church. You have a relationship with one another. It's the one another relationship that Jesus talks about. I've read through that book that Andrea, you and Adam have gone through. That book called I'm a Member. And it has a number of chapters, and at the end of the chapter, you're supposed to sign a pledge. I know it's not legal, but it has some inspiring words. Pledge number 3 goes like this: I will not let my church be about my preferences and desires. That is self-serving. I'm a member in this church to serve others and to serve Christ. My Savior went to a cross for me. I can deal with any inconveniences and matters that aren't my preferences or my style. You will experience a love for the church when you intentionally love the church. You have a deep sense of love for the church when you actively and intentionally practice love for the church. The opposite's also true. When you don't intentionally love the church, then you will not experience a love for the church. I'm sorry, but the church is about relationships. I hope you get that when I go through these one another commands, that we're called into relationship with each other. Love is a choice we make. Now, saying that you must love one another, church doesn't mean the church is perfect or that there aren't any problems. In fact, you read through the Bible, read through those epistles that Paul wrote, and they had problems. There weren't perfect people. They just went to God and they learned how to take care of those problems. Because, like I said, we all have our quirks. Being a preacher at a church all these, years, decades now, had one of those grand and glorious birthdays. Arnie, you're going to catch up with me for too long. So are you, John Conder. Katie, how old is your daddy? He's looked to it. 57. That means he's going to be... when you get older, you can make certain excuses. If there's a person you don't want to listen to anymore, just pretend you can't hear anymore when you get older. But I think of the dozens and dozens of people I've known in Christ Church, in a place I've served. Sometimes you see some of the worst in people, but sometimes you see the very, very best in people also. I see Bob Anderson, and I know Bob likes to watch some Jimmy Stewart movies, and he is bringing up a storyline. Remember the movie Shenandoah? Now, there's some classic lines, and I had the copy of it, and I thought, I'm going to read the script because I'll get it wrong. I lost that paper. But I remember Doug McClure played part of Sam, and he was kind of sweet on Jimmy Stewart's daughter. Her name was Jenny. So he asked for his permission to marry her. And I'll try to do the best Jimmy Stewart I can, okay? But, Sam comes, and Jimmy Stewart says, sit down, Sam. I don't like to have someone looking down on me when they talk to me. And he says, I want to ask your daughter's hand in marriage. And he asks this question, why do you want to do that for, Sam? And he says, well, because I love her. And he asks this question, do you like her, Sam? He says, but I said, no, Sam. You understand there's a difference between liking and loving. You can love someone and not like them. I liked Jenny's mom for 3 years after we got married before I loved her. You get the point? Sometimes we love people. Okay, I'm glad you love the church, but do you like the people? Hopefully you learn to like the people so you can love them. Jesus said love is expected. Second thing, I'm sorry if Jimmy Stewart didn't come off great, but I did the best I can. Love is reflected. See, love is just not expected by the Lord for us, but it's also expected from us. It says it here. Let's go back to verse 35. where it says, verse 35, it says, by this all men will know that you're my disciples. If you do what? If you love one another. The word Christian, which we all claim to be, literally means little Christ. Jesus said that people would know us as Christians by our love. In other words, if you claim to be a follower of Jesus Christ, you will reflect Christ's character. God is love, so we as Christians need to show His love as well. That when people see us, hopefully they will see Christ. We should be reflectors of His love. Alexander the Great, historically speaking, was one of the great leaders of all time. In a few short years, in his conquest, he conquered a land size about equal to that of the United States. In fact, he didn't get to enjoy it all. He died it before he got back to Greece. But the story goes that one day he was outside of his tent. He couldn't go to sleep one night. And he came across the guard who should have been keeping guard overnight. And he found him asleep. He startled the guard. Because, this is the great military leader, and I could die because the price for falling asleep when you're on guard duty could be death. In fact, it was not unknown for the commanding officer right after that to pour kerosene upon you and to light you up. But being surprised, Alexander the Great came to this young man and said, "What is your name?" The guard said, "My name's Alexander." "Can I ask you again, what's your name?" "My name's Alexander." Let me ask you one more time. What is your name?" He said, "My name is Alexander, sir." And Alexander the Great then looked at that young soldier right in the eye and he said, "Soldier, either change your conduct or change your name." There are many ways in which we must demonstrate love, but here Jesus says the primary way we demonstrate our love is how we treat one another. How do you treat one another? Our love for one another shows the practical love of God for us. Let's look over 1 John chapter 4, verses 19 to 21, because one of the people in the crowd to whom Jesus said this, the Apostle John had this to say. It says, "We love because He loved us." Now, if anyone says, "I love God," but yet he hates his brother, he is a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. Verse 21. "And He has given us this command, whoever loves God must also love his brother." It was the closing night of the VBS program. It was a Friday night. The night before, one of the teachers was sick or gone for some reason, and she did not get to see the student that visited that night. She saw her Friday night, and he met this student and noticed that this student had a problem, a handicap, only had one hand. But the program which they had practiced for was this little skit. You've seen it before. Having the kids come up, says, "Okay, we're going to do a demonstration of the church. Here's the church, here's the steeple. Turn it upside down and open it up, and here's all the people." And she realized, wait a minute, this is kind of embarrassing because how's that kid going to do it? Because she doesn't have two hands. And maybe it's the mark of God. One of the other students took her hand and put it in the hand of the student and says, "Oh, guess what? Now we can build the church together." I like that. She understood the truth about Christian love. Christian love is when one believer reaches out to another believer to build Christ's church. God calls us to be devoted to one another. One of those one another's we're going to look at. To honor one another above ourselves. Love is reflected. And here's the last thing. For I let you go eat over here. Love is directed. I found out this about love. It's expensive. It costs. The love that Jesus talks about is a sacrificial love, which means that it's more than just a feeling. I always play feelings, nothing more than feelings. Who sang that song? Not me. It's more than just a quiver in your liver. I thought that was pretty swift. It involves action. What does it look to intentionally love one another? to be in community with God as God commanded us to be. As I told you, He showed it just a few minutes before by washing their feet and then going to the cross for them. We love one another by serving one another. Well, I love you name the place. Well, do you serve those people? We love it by connecting with one another. We love it by giving and sharing the greatest gift we have, our love for Jesus Christ who died for us. Are we really loving? I want to close with a story. A famous preacher, matter of fact, he's still living. His name's Fred Craddock. Maybe the name doesn't ring a bell to you. To preachers, it does. He's, I think, taught down at Emory College. In fact, he was trained at Johnson Bible College a few years ago. And he told the story about his dad. The story with his dad was turned off to the church. I don't know, I think someone said or did something there at church. He didn't like it, so he just became a dropout. He just stopped going to church. And every time he tried to talk to his dad, this young preacher boy tried to talk to his dad to go to church. So I don't want to go there because all that church cares about is all they want is another name and another pledge. You got it? They only care about my total on that tote board and the money I give them. In fact, year after year, whenever that little church had one of these evangelistic crusades, the evangelist would go seek Fred's dad to try to get him converted. He said, don't waste your time. All the church wants, they want just another name. They just want another pledge. He said that's what his dad always said, except for one time. He talks about how his dad got the cancer. And over a period of time, toward the end, he went and saw his dad at the hospital to the point he couldn't speak anymore. And his dad weighed a measly 78 pounds. What caught Fred's eye was not just the appearance of his dad. He looked around the hospital room and he saw these flowers and all these cards every place. And he looked at them and it dawned on him it was the names from the people from the church. Now, this is a true story. The only way his dad could communicate was just by writing down notes on a notepad. And his dad motioned for him to come over to the bed, and he wrote down words from Hamlet where it says, draw your breath in pain as you tell my story. And he said, Dad, what's your story? And his father erased that, and he wrote these 3 words, I was wrong. What happened? That church loved Fred Craddock's dad. And because they loved him, they gave God the room and the time to change one man's heart. All because they were committed to this concept of loving one another. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believed in Him would not perish but have everlasting life. The early church. Tertullian was a historian, a Christian historian from the 2nd century. He wrote that there was a time the Roman government was pretty disturbed about that church, and the church was increasing by numbers by leaps and bounds, and they were suspicious of the church because they met in secret and they wouldn't even take a pinch of incense in honor of the emperor. So they sent out spies into the church of that day. And the spies went into that Christian meeting and they came back and they wrote this report. They said, those Christians are very strange. They meet together in an empty room to worship. They don't have an image. And they speak of one by the name of Jesus, who is absent, but whom they seem to be expecting at any time. And get this, and how they love Him and love one another. I wonder what would be the report if we had an atheistic government. Now, no government jokes, okay, folks? But what would it be if someone from the government was sent here to spy on our church? What report they would give of us? Would they comment on our love for one another? If someone followed you around all the time with a pad and paper, would they see that your life was consumed by love? The love that we show or don't show is our evidence of being a Christian. Jesus said, You are my disciples if you have love for one another. Can I ask you a simple question? Are you his disciple? The Apostle John, the story says, and I've shared with you before, said on his latter days when he could no longer walk around, that he is carried around from place to place, and he kept going every place he had, just saying these three words: love one another. Love one another. Love one another. You know, I found out I got some work to do on that. Do you have some work to do on it? Yeah, I think we do. Do you love God? I believe you do. In fact, I have a feeling that if you're outside of God's realm, you probably love Him. And you probably want, I need to get connected with God. And I'm not just talking about getting connected to a church, but I need to get connected with God. How can I do that? Jesus said, you believe in God, believe also in me. He says, I tell you this, unless you repent, that is, unless you turn around your life from the way it's been going, He says, you will perish. Straight up. He says, whoever confesses me before man, I will confess for my Father is in heaven. Then He said this at the very back of a gospel, Mark 16:16. He who believes and is baptized will be saved. You need to get connected to God? I pray that you think about it, or that you'll pull the trigger and you'll do it, or we'll have a talk about it. Maybe you need to get connected with this body of believers, because it's kind of a package deal. When you come to God, you also come to a crowd of people. And it's also to help with your fellowship as we grow together. Maybe some of you need to do that in membership, or maybe someone just needs to have someone to pray with you today, and we could do that. Would you stand with me? And Gary and Mary Dale, would you lead us in this song?